All right. It's 12:04 p.m., November 13, 2023. I'd like to call to order the Governance Committee meeting for Ulster County IDA. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Roll call afterwards, right?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We'll do the roll call now. Costaval present. Lynn Archer.
Here.
Present. Diane Enion absent with notice. All right. Maybe we can take a couple of minutes to review the minutes and approve those.
make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second. All aye?
Aye.
Thanks, Lynn. Motion approved. No public comment. We don't need an executive session unless, Joe, you tell me otherwise. No? All right.
Sorry, no. I'm
Yep.
still on the unmute button.
No, I got it. Thank you.
Yep, nothing here.
Yeah, so old business is essentially the housing UTEP and policy.
Right, and I thought we were going, last time we met, and it's in the minutes here, we were going to try and meet with a couple of other folks, and I don't know if that occurred.
It has not occurred because I wanted to review the draft with you and Diane first before we
Okay.
go out and meet anybody.
Okay,
Because if there's anything missing or
yeah,
we need to address something similar to what we were discussing earlier,
right.
I'd rather have it tighter and then go to some even legislative members.
Yeah, well, I think if I could, I think the
Please, yeah.
best, let's go through what Joe put together.
That's
because
right.
I have a couple of questions and
Right, right.
clarifications and some, I think, follow-up things we should be considering doing that will tighten up what
Yep.
we've got here,
So
if that's
Joe-
helpful.
No, that is exactly what I was going to at least suggest to Joe. Joe, if you're able to, if you could walk all of us through the draft you had shared, and we can react to that.
Sure, happy to do so, Costu. What I have in front of me
I
is
have
the
it.
memo that's dated November 6th to you, Costu.
Yep.
And there are a total of 6 tabs, if you will. So what I'm going to do is just run through each of these in summary fashion. If you have any questions,
Joe?
please interrupt.
I don't have the
Before you do
6th
that-
memo. It would be helpful to have the 6th memo.
So that's the one I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Okay,
I have the
The first one.
The first one.
the first one. I do not,
And the
what's?
second one is revised to add certain things that you had mentioned. Is that right, Joe?
Correct,
All right.
that's right.
Please continue.
Okay, just, I'm a little confused now. So the first one, which I never received, only have the one from the 12th.
That's the one. So second one Joe sent recently.
Okay, so
And I
what's
just-
the first one?
Joe? The 12th.
Excuse me?
What was the first memo on November 6th?
No, October 12th.
October
Correct.
12th was the first one.
What do you, what?
Oh,
what-
never
what's the
mind.
date?
I'm sorry, I never got this one.
Okay.
She just printed out some stuff.
So I never even got a chance to review this. Okay. All right, sorry. Sorry, Joe.
The October memo is exactly the same as the November 6th memo, and the attachments, except that I've added tab 5 and tab 6.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't receive the October materials,
No, I received the October, I didn't receive the November. If that just came out
okay.
with the package.
Well,
Yeah, I didn't see it. That's all right. Now I'm caught up.
I think, Joe, it'll be same discussion. If you're able to go over those, I think
Yeah,
it'll
if
be
nothing
helpful.
changed
Yeah.
in tabs 1 to 4, you just added tabs 5 to 6, that's an easy fix. I didn't know if it was rewritten. I was looking at the red line copy. Is this a red line copy?
I
The
believe
12th
so.
one is red
Yeah.
line.
The 12th one is, this isn't.
and maybe I'm confused. What's
Yeah.
why is there a reference to the 12th?
Because we have in the package we have a 12th, and on the side we received November 6th one.
Yeah, so
That's why.
the reason is, Joe, I received the October 12th, but I never received the updated from November 6th. Or if it did, it just came in for the meeting, which I have not had a chance to review, so.
I think it went out with
It
the.
went out recently.
the-
Friday?
Yeah, right.
Friday?
No, when did it go
No,
out?
it was just printed right now and
Yeah.
handed.
Okay, but what I'm trying to say is
Never
the
went out.
November 6th memo is the latest one.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you've had the opportunity to read the November 6th memo, then you've seen everything in the October memo, because the November 6th memo is a carryover of the October memo, with the exception of I added 5 and 6.
Right.
tabs 5 and 6.
Got it.
Okay?
So Joe, we can go over those tabs.
Great. Okay. So what I did, um, just by way of background, I was asked by Costume, I was asked by Hillary, I was asked by the chair to prepare revisions to the housing policy and revisions to the UTEP to reflect the IDA doing housing projects. At the risk of being too blunt, I wasn't asked to do a particular policy. I was asked to do some policies. So these are my thinking, not the thinking of anyone at the table.
Right.
What I did try to do was, I have been listening carefully at these governance committee meetings and the IDA meetings, and obviously there's been a lot of involved discussion about what the IDA wants to do by way of housing. Some of that is reflected in this, and some of it, frankly, is Joe Scott throwing a dart at the wall. But I think, based on my discussions with both Hillary and Costume, I think this is helpful for you all because it puts something on paper to give you something to react to.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job in that regard. I mean, I think you picked up some of the concerns everybody had, so
Okay.
I think you did a good job listening.
So on tab 1, and that's, you've got to kind of look out the window for a second. There's really two issues here. One is, what is our housing policy going to look like? And then number 2, what is our UTEP going to look like? So that's why there's in effect, two sets of documents here. There's the housing policy, and then there's changes to the UTEP. So tab 1 is a change to our existing housing policy. So if you go to tab 1, and I'm sorry the pages aren't paginated consecutively, but at the bottom, behind tab 1, you'll see a document with a draft slug at the top, housing policy, housing project policy, and if you look at this printed page 3 at the bottom, and the red line, you'll see that what I did was I eliminated the consents of the county and the school. And the reason I did that was, frankly, 1, to stimulate discussion, 2, it's similar to Duchess, and 3, there's been some discussion at the board level of, hey, we've been appointed by the board, the county legislature, to make decisions on economic development and projects, and why would we lay that responsibility off or those obligations off on the county and the school? Now, I did leave the town and the city in there because from a housing standpoint, that is oftentimes the most direct impact. So that was my thinking. Again, a lot of policy there. There's some legal issues there, but a lot of policy, and that's really for all of you to think about and digest, and then, reach some agreement on. So that's tab 1. Tab 1 is a, quote, pure, close quote, housing policy. And based on this housing policy, you would first ask the applicant to get the approval of the city or a town. As unchanged in paragraph F, you can supersede that if you want. You can move forward on a project without the local approval if you so determine. So that's the concept of tab 1 and the changes to the housing policy.
So can we talk about that before we move on to the next tab? Is that your intent to try and do? Okay. Because a couple of things, though, Joe. Where does the village come into this? Because you can get a town approving something, but a village, like say Wawarsing, I'll use that as an example. The town wants to do something and it's a property in there, but what if it's in the village? And we have no village reference here. Same with New Paltz, which is the village. So I just wondered, was that an intentional omission, or was that just...
Yeah, that was intentional on my part.
Okay,
We
can
could
you
certainly
explain
add,
why?
we could certainly add the village in. Again, that's a policy issue. Um,
So why would you leave the village out? What would be the exception that, because it's smaller, less, um, uh, opportunity for some sort of build or something? I'm just trying to gauge the rationale. And for the purposes of a discussion around policy.
sure. Well, I guess not guess, the overriding issue that I applied there, Lynn, was this concern for multiple overlapping jurisdictions and trying to avoid conflict where I could, um, and to make this process as simple as possible. Um, if we have the town and the village, I could certainly imagine a situation where one approved and one didn't, and then what do we do? Um, so there was frankly some judgment on.
Does that force, I'm just asking, does that force the town and the village to resolve their discrepancies, or does it create further lines of battle, so to speak, around an issue? And, I guess if the project is in the village, how do you get, the town doesn't have authority, the village has its own, maybe we define it by where the project resides, that governing body, because each has a governing body. The town is a governing body making decisions for the town, and the village has a governing body making the decisions for the village.
I kind of like that thread. We could, and what we could do in terms of avoiding conflict, we could say, in situations where the project's located in both a village and a town, the village consent is the only one that we need.
That makes
I don't know.
Yeah, because otherwise I think we're fighting,
And
we're
I think-
creating lines.
Yeah,
Actually,
because
Joe,
sorry,
so
go ahead.
no, not to interrupt, just to keep on, Lynn, your thread. You brought up Wawarsing, and a few days ago I was thinking of Village of New Paltz.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the governance works there, so I'm asking a question.
There's
Would
a
it,
village and a town.
that's why,
Yeah.
yeah.
They have the same thing.
Same, yeah.
And it's more likely to go in the village.
That's where I'm
Yeah.
going with it, because majority of the things are happening from an industrial standpoint on the periphery of the village, but may
Yeah.
still fall in the village.
I
So
agree.
what I was going to ask you, to
And
Lynn's comment,
and it's opposite in Wawarsing,
that's right.
where
it's
the
opposite.
opportunity
Yes,
is
that's right.
greater, yeah.
So would it be better, again, it's a question, you can shoot me down immediately, would it be better to say something like the jurisdiction, whatever the appropriate terminology be, and then have,
That's what I
An
just
example.
said, where
Yeah.
the project, that's exactly what I just said, where
well,
the project
jurisdiction
resides.
could be under the town too, right?
No,
It is village,
no,
but
if the project's in the village sets the codes, the village makes the decision,
Yes,
if
but-
it's in the village. If it's in the town is separate.
no, I'm being more specific. I'm saying instead of saying village, town, and city and being boxed into those, instead should we just say the jurisdiction?
That's what I just said.
Okay.
That
But
where
that-
the project resides, if it
But-
resides in the village, if it resides in the town is the arbiter
So
of
the next question that I have is, does that include the school district too then?
School district's not even in here, so
I think
that's
he
the other
took-
question.
No, it's not here, but that's my point. If we just say blanketly jurisdiction, does that automatically include the
Oh,
school
I see.
district? Joe, that's all I was asking.
I didn't follow that question, Costu.
So if we simply use the term and not delineate every single jurisdiction, but
No,
simply
I wouldn't.
say,
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't recommend that. I would
that's
say
what
city,
I'm going
town.
for. Yeah.
I would say city, town, or village.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of a project that's located in both the town and the village controls.
Right.
But we'll keep that language specific so it's not confused with
Right.
the school district.
Correct, right.
That
So
makes
you want to
sense.
keep
Yeah.
the school district out
And the county out.
and the county out, right? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's my suggestion. Again, I'm, this discussion is very positive, I think.
Yeah. I think that
And,
makes
and talk to me about the omission of, county and school. Just because we had challenges, on a project with school, I mean, there is an implication to the school.
Absolutely, but again, what I wanted to do was get people talking and thinking. Um, my experience generally with schools is that it's a hard lift to get them to approve an IDA project. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should wholesale, ignore them, because we wouldn't. They'd get copies of the notices. They'd be invited to the public hearing. They would be, any of the comments that they made, would be part of the record. But I can tell you, from my experience with the Kingstonian, is that while we did not get the approval of the school board for the Kingstonian project, I think at least, and I think it was actually 4-3 against, which frankly was closer than I thought it was going to be. I would say that at least one, maybe two of those people that didn't vote for the project struggled with why the school should be voting on this in the first place, and what measure, how should they evaluate the decision. And so, I mean, it was a very, and again, I'm being a little flippant, and not insulting. It was almost metaphysical at points, with the discussion. So that's why I left the school out. I think a lot of times, and I've seen this in other jurisdictions, the school looks at us and say, why are you coming to us? And part of it is, frankly, they're not sure what to do with it, the request. And the other part is, while they may be in favor of the project, they're concerned about revenues, and potential revenue impacts. Clouds and complicates the analysis for them. So that's why I did what I did.
That's an interesting point, and I can see in particularly on housing now, because housing presents a very different project versus a industrial project. Yes, housing, and depending on size of apartments, etc., could indicate an influx of children of school age that may or may not have been accounted for, right? And so if taxes are, part of it, although in the first several years of any project, it's in the build stage. It's not and that's where the greatest deferral of reassessing taxes for a project would be the most beneficial, correct? I'm just thinking out loud. I'm trying to sort through the advantages of it and the disadvantages, and
while you're thinking about that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, while you're thinking about that, we're not changing our UTEP with respect to deviations. And that was the context in which, that was part of the context in which we went to the school board in the Kingstonian, because that was a deviation. So perhaps logically we say, well, if we're going to change our pilot structure with respect to a particular project by virtue of doing a deviation, we should go to each of the affected tax jurisdictions who are affected financially, including the school district, and get their consent.
Oh, because
But
that's
again,
the
it's-
only
it's-
place that you really need to do it. That's right. I forgot that.
We still have that in the
Yeah.
UTEP
Okay.
is not changed there.
Okay.
And I think conceptually, I mean, when a builder is going to do a housing project, they get the local approval, right? They
Right.
get zoning, planning, etc., and that would be the city, the town, and the village.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, just so I understand, under the section 2, number 1, project, the agency will only consider the grant, I'm going to read A first. The agency will only consider the granting of any financial assistance as defined under the Act for the following projects that provide housing. A project that satisfies the definition of a continuing care retirement community. Is that similar to a woodland pond?
Yes.
Okay, which isn't that a non-for-profit? Is that
Yes,
technically
yep.
set up as a non-for-profit, right?
Yes. Yep.
So there are retirement communities that are for-profit too, as well, right?
Absolutely.
So
yes.
they would not, for-profit communities would not be considered under this, correct?
No, they would, I think.
Correct. We'd have to
Yeah,
go to
see?
E. We'd have to get their approval. Under A, we don't need.
Why would I'm confused, Joe.
Isn't
Why
that
would
commercial?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it could be considered commercial. But I think that's why we need to clarify in this what is intended, because you go down the next one, I think B gets into the commercial, right? Yeah, but a commercial facility, but, again,
but
the
see-
definition of,
That's-
we're getting into
Yeah.
definitions then, and so if
Yes.
our definitions aren't clear, it creates this question.
Right, but see, if you look at C,
Yep.
C are the other projects that we can't do unless we go through E and F.
Yeah,
Yep.
I knew this was the legalese that, makes my brain go mush.
Well, the history here is that, under the prior administration of the IDA, that administration only wanted to do two types of projects: workforce and continuing care. That was it.
Right.
Zero, zilch. So we can scratch A, and make it that we won't do anything unless we go through E. But that would mean we'd need to eliminate A, and A was, at least like I said, under the prior administration. No, 2 administrations ago. That administration said we are only going to do 2 types of housing, because you'd have to put your hand over E and F. E and F wasn't there.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is the struggle. In any one of these cases, state agencies are established for low-income housing. There are state agencies that support senior housing. The state, we had the debate with the dormitories way back when, Joe, and I think you were here with the whole
Yeah,
New
and,
Paltz,
the New
right?
Paltz, yep.
So,
Yeah, student
so
housing,
the
yep.
fact of the matter is, there are other avenues. I don't know if the hurdles for some of these other avenues are greater, and if they can't get through that, do they then come through us? And I'm just trying to, because it gets complicated with the different funding mechanisms out there, right? So I'm just trying to sort through in my own head, how to simplify and clarify, because if people are getting money from these other agencies, do they really need to come to us?
Well, but they don't get what they don't get in the normal course. There's some exceptions,
Okay,
limited exceptions, but in the normal course, what they don't get is the sales tax exemption
Right.
and the real property tax exemption. So, um, market rate housing, even low income housing. We do low income housing projects all the time, where there's state funding, through tax credits or state bonding, but they structure the project through the IDA in order to get the real property tax exemption.
okay. So that's the reason they would come to us. Just trying to think. So if they've got the state supporting that effort and the community supporting it, then what we provide in the sales tax exemptions and the real property adjustments until completion, right?
And if I may just add to what Lynn is saying, it might be something further out, Joe, but if this is the structure currently, let's say, and wouldn't we be looking at the returns analysis as well?
Yeah.
And that'll have to be incorporated, what Lynn is suggesting, into that returns analysis also. So going through the steps, I think would be helpful to me as well, to just understand what are the steps in terms of approvals and funding, in terms of who comes first. And
Probably the state, that's where they get the
Exactly.
biggest bang
Yes,
for their
exactly.
buck, right?
Especially because of authorities, right?
Right. Is that true, Joe?
Well, certainly, certainly a big part of the benefit is offered if there's tax exempt financing or if there's tax credit financing offered through the state. That's a significant amount of the benefit. But a real property tax abatement is also a
It
significant
is,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
component. And so having what Costu was talking about is having, a financial consultant review the pro forma of the developer and run a calculation to find out or to determine what the rate of return is for the developer with respect to his or her investment in the project. And that will give you some guidance as to whether your participation is justified or not.
So putting parameters on that?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable certainly I'm not comfortable putting parameters on that, but what my suggestion would be is that if we move forward on some sort of housing policy, that in connection with your review of the cost benefit analysis, that you dig a little bit deeper and get an ROI calculation. And there are,
Which was done post on the Kingstonian. It was done post. Just
not
almost
post-Cree.
towards the end. Towards the end,
Yeah.
it was done.
Yeah. Yes,
Right.
it was.
But it
before
did
the closing.
Yeah, but it
Yes.
did exclude school tax.
The reason I asked that question is simply because that we should be very clear with respect to what is included or not included here, because it will impact returns and several other things as well. Given the current environment, I want to just be very careful in any environment, as a matter of fact, how we outline this. Is there a way you think that it should be delineated by any chance, or should it be just embedded in this language?
Or in the process.
Or the process, yeah.
Yeah.
Or the letter that we
Because
send to them.
because the process, it will, although I kind of agree that in a policy, there's some clarity, but you want to give yourself a little wiggle room too, but a process should go hand in hand with the policy.
Right. And how much far? Like
How
much
far do
you
we
leave?
go? Yeah. I know we just threw a lot at you, Joe.
Yeah, no, I think the issue there is I would strongly recommend that you require some sort of cost-benefit analysis, which includes an ROI analysis, and 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 my and I would speculate that the range of acceptable ROIs for a developer differ based on the type of project and also, frankly, the economic conditions. So what might be appropriate today might not be appropriate 5 years from now. But your consultant that you would hire to do the review, because I see it with at least one of our other IDA clients, they get a report from the consultant saying the return on investment here is reasonable and the IDA involvement is justified.
And it's based on economic conditions, and what was the other point?
Economic conditions, the type of project.
Type of project, yeah.
You know, I mean, if the stock market is at 40,000, I got to think that the return on investment is going to be a lot, or what you're going to need to show on a project like this is going to need to be a lot different than if the stock market was at 3,000.
Right.
You know?
Right. So, but and I like that. So, do we embed that cost benefit analysis, ROI calculation in the policy? And I might add that I believe that should be a third party. And paid for by the applicant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And may I ask Joe,
We didn't
which
let
county?
can we get that question answered? Just should it be in the policy?
Oh, yes.
Well, yeah, I don't think. Yeah, we can certainly add that language. I mean, yeah. So the short answer is yes. Yes, add cost benefit, which is already part of the statute, but with an ROI and paid.
That means
for
current market
project
conditions.
applicant.
Yeah.
And Joe, what I was going to ask was related.
And selected by the IDA.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Which county
No, go ahead. Sorry.
was it? Which county was it that you referred to, and do they have it in the policy?
No, they do this on, they have, I mean, they have fairly involved operating procedures,
Okay.
but not all of them are, quote, written down. I mean, it's, because you could, they have taken the position that they want some flexibility, so, but we can certainly add that to, and we could say something like, at the discretion of the IDA, so that you have some flexibility there.
Well, and so maybe it's one of the first questions as we present to the board is, here are a couple of things that we need to decide on that will impact what is in the policy versus what is in the operating procedures. And I think we should lay out clearly, for example, level of flexibility, and if there are portions of the policy where we think that's important, I think we should identify those things right off the bat, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
And Joe, this is a question again. To clarify, if you were to implement what Lynn just said, would it be a reference to the operating procedures, or do we lose flexibility? How are you thinking about it, if I may ask? Not to get in too much detail, but just curious.
It is a juggling act.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I guess I'd like to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, because it's about legal standing, right? Anybody going to challenge anything we put in, it becomes what's the most defensible. You hate to say that, but it's part of doing business, and so you want to ensure that you're providing yourselves enough flexibility, but not so much that it becomes a point in a target. Yeah.
And
Right. I mean, it could be as simple as, when you look at our application, there's about 15 paragraphs at the end of the applications talking about all the different things the project applicant has to do.
Mhm.
We could say something like, in the case of a housing project, the applicant may be requested by the IDA to provide for da 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 da
Yeah.
da da da, and such report will be delivered at the request of the IDA in its discretion and at the cost of the project applicant.
Yep.
So we could have it as simple as that.
Right.
Or we could have something as we could have a paragraph G here on this housing policy, but I'm not sure if I would recommend that because that kind of locks it in,
you in, right.
A little bit more,
Yeah.
That's why we were asking. Yep.
Yeah, that's why I said, is it better to put something like this in policy, or is it in operating procedures and?
Yeah,
But,
and I think
but
the latter
ensure
would, yeah.
transparency for an applicant, so that it's not a surprise,
Right.
down the road. But most of them
Right.
look at all aspects, they're used to looking at all aspects, right?
And they should be reading both anyways.
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Some will be their responsibility.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so that's it. The other thing is, and I guess this goes into, as we get a little more into the project, I mean, I think there is definitely an opinion that market rate housing should not be incentivized. It is an incentive enough on their return in that investment. So, if we're going to say, if we're differentiating workforce housing from market rate housing and still ensuring that a project is meaningful, and it may be only meaningful to the manufacturing firm coming in asking for this kind of housing benefit, right? So that kind of gets at the twist.
yes. And
Yeah.
Joe,
This is-
before you, sorry, go ahead.
No. I would love to hear your answer to this, Joe, because this came up when I was up and the ABO was talking up at, the market rate didn't get mentioned. It was, how are you tying these projects to your mission? And, is it serving the workforce community? So.
Really, yeah,
Yeah.
right. And then and then over time, what happens?
Yeah.
Does it continue on?
Right.
Do we still monitor rents? And is there a plan for ensuring rents coincide with median incomes of residents of the? So it's a complicated.
It is.
And that's what I have been
And they-
going crazy over.
In fact, Joe, before you respond, I wanted to go back to the market conditions you mentioned.
Yeah.
If we mentioned that explicitly, and I'm just thinking out loud, please shoot me down, would that be something that could extend a threshold period, if you may, for certain parameters that will be checked on through the life of the project? And then,
Well,
For
the life
example-
of the construction project,
the
or
life
the
of
life of
the-
the project
the
being
deferrals.
attached to the manufacturing project, right? Because that's really where we see the benefit
Yeah,
of
the
a
deferrals.
housing policy,
I
right?
think the latter.
Okay.
We should talk about it because
Yeah.
this is all coming out, right?
Yeah, no, it's a complicated
Yes.
issue.
It
I mean, has anybody cracked the code, Joe?
Well, one of the things I think I saw other IDAs doing was tying it not just to, but is the project, the housing project accessible to manufacturers, that may be
In the
wanting
vicinity,
that,
right.
is it on a bus route? What is the manufacturer paying as wages, and then is that project affordable for people living there based on getting wages from that manufacturer? Is it kind of like, does it fit in, and they talked about Micron a lot, which is coming out to Western New York. I mean, that's 3,000 jobs.
Right.
And that's a pretty rural area. So they're going to need to bring people in from other areas.
And that was the last point that I was going to add. Rural areas, does that? So we're talking about market conditions. Does location matter as well? Because there might be certain locations where a developer doesn't get a same return because the market conditions, local market conditions, are different than the macro conditions we were talking about. Or is it going too detailed?
Well, we have the distressed areas part that we
Yes.
can do.
The
Next door.
overlay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that fits in, but.
Sorry, Joe, we're throwing a lot at you.
Well, I think what it boils down to is that it highlights the complexity of a housing project and doing it in a fair manner but also in a way that is gonna, I mean, people in Kingston are looking at this housing policy as the, end-all be-all to address the housing issues, and that's not what
That's
this is
not.
going to be.
It'll be far from the mission then if we were to do that.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
to stay close to the mission.
And they were very, strongly worded on staying close to, that IDA stay close to the mission when it comes to housing. And I think Ithaca, do you know Ithaca at all? Do you work with them, Joe? They're like
I'm sorry, what was that question, Hillary?
Ithaca has an IDA,
yeah.
its own
Yeah.
IDA within the county. It's not a county
Yeah.
IDA.
Yeah.
And they basically say if you're coming in to the IDA with a housing project and it's tied to something else that's not specific to like a manufacturer or something, you've got to get the backing first of the housing authority
Right.
or whatever else. Like you can't come in and do one independent.
A one-off, yeah.
Of another.
So it's requiring
governing-
so it's requiring state engagement?
Yeah, so if you're gonna come in and do a low-income project, let's say in the city of Kingston, you'd have to be tied to like the housing authority, Kingston Housing Authority or RUPCO or something. You'd have to bring in that backing. You can't just come in and do your own low-income housing. And then they also do conservative 10-year pilots and really try to stay away from complicated deviated pilots for housing. So they have a very conservative policy, but they're finding that they're getting a lot of housing projects to come in with that.
Yeah, because everybody needs, they need housing, and if someone can get someone to finance a housing project and thereby increase a greater return
Yeah.
on their investment in the housing, then of course they would do that. So, but we want to ensure that it, meets the needs of the
Meets needs.
community, meets the needs of businesses that we're bringing to the area,
That's right.
because that is really driving what we do.
Exactly.
That's the
We
point,
do
yes.
not, it's not about addressing where we have housing issues in a neighborhood. It's about addressing housing issues as it relates to economic
Absolutely.
development.
That's right. And job creation, yeah.
And job
Yes,
creation.
Exactly.
So, and we've got that pretty clear, I think, or do we need to clarify it even more in our purpose?
Well, maybe we add a reference to housing specifically in our mission. Whenever we do a housing project, and you'll see that with the Kingstonian resolutions, that we had a specific finding that housing is consistent with our message, consistent with our mission, consistent with the statute. Kingstonian's a little bit of an easier housing project because it's a mixed use facility. There's a hotel, there's office space, retail. So that's an easier project to fit
Except that we
into
don't
the IDA
incentivize
statute.
retail. We don't incentivize retail. Yes, we incentivize if it is recreational, right?
Well,
Which
no,
would speak to the hotel.
So
I know we keep
Yeah.
referring to Kingstonian, but I think that
Well, I think what, the ABO was kind of seeing with that is that your retail percentages are low enough, and that because it's so clearly defined as commercial. They gave an example of mixed use, but then cautioned against, coming under tourism, because the tourism, incentivizing component of the IDA, and stop me if I'm wrong, has to be the tourist thing itself. It can't be things that support the tourism. So like
Okay.
a
I see.
hotel doesn't really count because it's serving the tourists that come to the area. It's not the tourist thing itself. Now, maybe it had like a casino and you could get married there, and they had the world.
or it's attached to a
Large-
rail trail,
yeah.
which they're
So it has
supporting
to be
the
draw
activities there. Yeah,
that's
okay.
bringing people in.
Yeah.
It's not the supports that serve the people coming into the area. Am I saying that correctly, Joe?
Yeah, you listen very carefully to the ABO. I don't agree with their position on that,
Well,
but
he
that's
made it
their,
very clear. You couldn't help but listen. So
yeah, that's their view, is that it's not enough to bring people into the community. You have to bring people into the community for your particular purpose. So you're right, a hotel which brings people into the community is not a tourist destination, but a hotel with a large convention center that's hosting events, that's a tourist destination.
Right.
Now, do I agree with that? No. But is the ABO position a more conservative position and easier to defend? Absolutely, yes.
Well, and again, I think it boils down to what's in the best interest of our county. So we have that flexibility, right, of testing the boundaries of the ABO's issue, which we've done, I think, on multiple ones, on multiple hotels coming up. You look at something like a Mohawk.
Yeah.
That is tourism
100%.
personified, right?
Right.
And Joe, when you
Well,
mentioned,
we've also amended our policy with respect to retail and hotels, not to, so that we can't do a pure hotel.
right,
Good.
Yeah.
That was something this IDA said, well, we're not going to do that.
And that impacted the project in the town of Ulster, right? As I recall, or am I recalling correctly or no?
Well, I don't think we've said no to a project yet,
Okay.
have we? We may have. Hotels haven't been very, and we're kind of getting far afield here.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
Hotels haven't been favored with this IDA for some time because of the wage issues, and whether the job numbers that are estimated are actual, so.
Joe, let me ask you a question related to what you said a minute ago about mission, potentially revising the mission.
Purpose,
How,
yeah.
how does that, how would you, and again, it'll have to be thought through very well, but how would you think about drafting something that does not go against the ABO, that IDA should not be working on housing projects? Because that, according to ABO, that's my understanding, that according to ABO, that strays far from the mission of employment creation and other economic development aspects that we have in the mission.
Well, I didn't have the opportunity to go to the event last week, but I have, one of my colleagues, Shannon Wagner, went, and the fact that the ABO was talking about doing housing in the first at all
Is a step in the right
Right.
direction, yeah.
was a remarkable development.
Shift,
Oh, okay. Well,
And,
Yeah.
That means it's on
So-
the table.
yeah.
So, and look, I don't mean to circle back with the Kingstonian. We would, this
okay.
is, any housing project that we would consider, we would have, we do, here, let's step back for a second. If you open up the IDA statute and the first paragraph of the IDA purposes, there's a reference to manufacturing, commercial, warehousing, ski resort, race cars, railroads, etc. But there is not a reference, other than continuing care facilities, to housing. Housing is not a reference point. There's actually been some legislation amendments but introduced that would add housing there. So what we do to protect our clients is that as a governmental body, you can make certain findings and determinations. So if and when we do a housing project, there'll be a seeker resolution, an approving resolution, but before we do the approving resolution, there'll be what is called a commercial findings resolution, where we go through the elements of the housing project and we describe how it's a, quote, commercial project. And it might be because it's located in downtown Kingston, and accordingly there's going to be foot traffic to businesses, et cetera, et cetera. Or it might be providing housing for a particular demographic that's been priced out of the area, and accordingly the jobs that those people serve are going unfilled because there's nobody there to. So there's a whole slew of elements that connect housing to economic development. I mean, one of the first questions, if Amazon came to you and said, we want to put a 1,000,000 square foot facility in Ulster County, their first question is going to be, do you have, 35 acres? The second question is, do you have 500 workers? And if you don't have the housing for the 500 workers, and that might be market rate housing because it might be all high income people.
Yeah.
Maybe they're bringing their corporate officers there. Well, that doesn't sound like workforce housing to me. That sounds like luxury, high end market housing. So that's really those are the issues that people struggle with. The City of Albany, I use them as an example all the time. The City of Albany IDA said, hey, we have a problem with the city, and this is all matter of public record. We have a problem with this city because it's not a 24/7 city. People go home at night. The expressways in and out of the city are packed in the morning and packed in the evening. People aren't living here. Well, the City of Albany IDA has done 30 over the last 6 years, 30 market rate housing projects up and down Broadway, up and down State Street, all market rate. There's no controls on the rent. They've looked at the pro formas of the project applicant. They've run ROI analyses. They've considered inflation. They've considered the cost. They've had third-party consultants review the numbers. But now, I look out my window, I see people walking their dogs. There's a dog park right across the street from my office. Now, I'm not saying that they've solved the problem, but there's been significant, we're talking tens of millions of dollars of market rate housing invested in downtown Albany that wouldn't have happened but for significant pilot abatement structures granted by the City of Albany IDA. But that was their policy. They made a decision. That's their strategic view on what they wanted to do.
But I'm correct me if I'm wrong here. That was also a distressed area that had some real crime issues, which was another overlay to why they made the decision in a specific area. It wasn't Albany citywide, correct?
The focus has been, yes, that's correct. The focus has been downtown, but they have done projects outside, in areas, in census tracts that are adjacent to distressed areas.
Yeah, which would make sense, but there's still a distressed area overlay that would allow that to occur, because that's another way of improving
It's another
communities.
element. It's another element. Absolutely, it's another element in supporting the IDA's determination to do a housing project. Correct. That's right.
Yeah, but I think market rate housing is going to be. That's going to be the hurdle. I hear what you're saying, and it makes.
I'm not arguing for it.
I know you're not. You're not. But
Okay.
You're raising an excellent point that, with the way a policy is written, you don't necessarily overtly talk about it. But is there a flexibility should something present itself that we could do something? But to me, the hurdles for something like that should be even greater, because I personally, this is my personal opinion, I'm not sure. I know there was a big debate about the Kingstonian and all of that. So the market rate housing was a big, I don't know, fly in the ointment that really got everyone up in arms. They lost sight of the public parking. They felt that, it wasn't as important. And yet I do think for the vibrancy of town, it has some value add, because parking here is horrible. people don't come here unless they live around here because it's easier to walk than it is to drive.
Mhm.
So I hear all that. Again, it's just, we probably are digressing, but it's an important point that, again, goes back to policy, what goes in the policy, what goes in our procedures, and and not providing so much flexibility that we get ourselves in trouble, but flexibility that we can consider something that we hadn't thought about. Because if this is a living, breathing
Yeah.
document that,
Makes sense.
we don't change in the middle of a project, but we do have some thoughtful consideration around, how to meet the needs of the community.
Yes, and if something comes up, at least it's a provision that we have thought about.
Yeah.
And maybe it relates, as you mentioned, Joe, to a specific area. Potentially it's under-resourced or underserved, or maybe it's a redevelopment.
Mhm.
And I think there could be a lot of different criteria for a project like that if it were to go through the idea process and be considered for approval.
So taking all of this, Joe, is there anything that we can include more clarity in our purpose as to why we would consider housing, that could help kind of address some of these things? Or is that something you would guide us to say, not necessary, we should put it here or there? Again, you may not want to answer, you may want to think about, but again, can we put that down as a,
Sure. Yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that?
Yeah, I don't mean for you to have to answer everything right away. We know how smart you are, Joe, but
Yes.
they're not easy questions, and it's thoughtful, and it's wanting to work through all the different aspects of where you put something. I get it.
Do we, Joe, here's a thought that, to kind of maybe piggyback on Lynn's question. Again, I'm just going to use Albany as the example you were using. Obviously our state government's up there. Albany is not necessarily known for drawing tourists from New York City looking for second home. So it's a very just different demographic than we have here. But would it be helpful if we had like a survey or some sort of piece of paper that gets done on a certain basis, so when projects coming, the board is not left to determine the need based on what they think is kind of going on in their heads or their neighborhoods, that there is something tangible. Yeah, so that way when these projects are coming, we're comparing it to a survey and a need that's been put out. And I think I was talking to someone, an IDA in the Hudson Valley, and there's a few of them that are working kind of together to put one. So it looks at the whole mid-Hudson Valley, but then you can pull out your county as well. And would that help maybe address the issue of need versus trying to define it in policy?
No, Hillary, that's a great point. And again, sorry to do this, but using the city of Albany as an example, they hired a consultant early on and said, hey, what do we need to do to become a 24/7 city? And they said, well, one thing you need to do is you need to create more housing stock. We have all these vacant commercial office buildings in downtown Albany. We need to convert them, and that's what most of these projects have been, conversions. There's been some new construction, but there's also a lot of conversion, and that's helped two things. One, it's reduced the vacancy rate in downtown Albany, so it's statistically it looks better.
Mm-hmm.
And second, it's a reuse of, like I said, vacant buildings. The second point that the consultant was asked to address was, does the development community need assistance in order to undertake these projects? And the consulting team did an analysis and said yes. The tax rate structure in the city of Albany is such that no developer would undertake a housing project in the city of Albany and pay full boat because their ROI wouldn't support the project. And so there was black and white excuse me, black and white support for granting the abatements and the assistance that the IDA or has been offering. So it's been a very professional, very profound, very logical, very step-by-step process where the development team has supported these efforts. And what was particularly at the risk of getting into real detail, I mean, the current mayor was on the board of the IDA when she was the elected treasurer. Currently, the elected treasurer is on the board, and they both, even though they, obviously are concerned about tax revenues of the city, they're very supportive of the IDA's efforts because they recognize the tax imbalance and the need for development to get the curves righted with respect to development and tax revenue. I mean, there's been such a flight, frankly, in general, you see it everywhere, not just the city of Albany, to suburban living and also suburban economics, by commercial economics that downtown cities have been hurting. So the short answer is yes, and that's I do follow. I think you're talking about Patterns for Progress. I do follow their materials, and and the city of Albany has a consultant's report on the shelf that says, "Hey, we need to be doing this."
And that consultant was hired by the mayor, right?
Yeah, it was hired by the city.
So
that's right, the city of Albany.
That goes back to, I think, one of the key things that I think we've had a missed opportunity on is really closely linking the IDA's initiatives to what is being driven at the county level. Because without that, it is very hard to get all the moving parts.
Yeah, and the fundamental theme seems to be revitalization.
Yeah.
If we take the Albany example.
Well, that worked for them,
Yeah,
but
no, it will
not
have to
sure
be
what
different
they.
for us.
Yeah, it might be different here. Anyway, this is all really helpful. I think it just further makes my head spin about all that needs to be done. But kind of going back to, because we just hit the policy, right? So I think we addressed the village or where the project sits and or project resides, if it resides in both the village. And again, this is all policy. Does our policy get a public hearing?
There's no requirement, but my suggestion would be that we hold a public hearing for both any amendments to the housing policy and any amendments to the UTEP.
So my understanding, Joe, and this was Mike actually wanted me to check with you on this, is that once we have a draft that the board is going to be voting on, we have to send that out formally to all of the affected taxing jurisdictions, let them know the date of the board vote, give them time to either submit comment or be in person for that. And that's what I was told, again, up at the Economic Development Summit.
So if we, to the point we had talked about earlier about distinguishing village from town, from et cetera, that gets clarified in our policy, and they have a chance to opine, and maybe they'll bring up something we hadn't thought about, which I think is important.
So am I correct in that we have to let them know formally and then give them the opportunity for input or to attend the meeting and we have to let them know the date the board will be voting on it?
Hillary, I'd have to check the statute.
Okay.
My memory is that there wasn't anything that required a public hearing.
Not a public hearing, it's just a public notification. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, my recommendation would be that we hold a public hearing and that we certainly notify, and as part of the public hearing process, we would notify formally everyone. Periodically, this IDA has amended their UTEP, and and we've had public hearings. We've sent out materials to each village, town, school, the city, and the county in connection with those amendments. We send out a red line showing what the old language is, what the new language is.
Yeah.
Memo and explanation. So sure, we can do all that, and I can double check the statute. But yeah. So we're on the same page there.
Okay, yeah, what are the exact language, we can figure out what that
Right.
is.
And one more thing, in here, I thought that one of the letters that we were trying to do was put the onus on the project person to
Yeah.
gain the taxing jurisdiction's approval and then coming to us once they have those approvals. So that the onus would be on them to do the legwork,
Yeah, that's what Mike had wanted to.
but that's not what this says, right?
That's true, and again, you're doing a very good job of repeating a pet peeve of the chair. It says the agency shall. Historically, and I've had the opportunity, my office has done your work for years and years and years. We have not ever gone to the affected taxing jurisdictions and gotten their approvals. We have always made the project applicant do it.
Okay.
So we can make that quote clearer in this language, but the bottom line is that we can condition as we see fit how we get the approval. So operationally, the project applicant has always gone to the the affected taxing jurisdictions to get deviation approvals.
And is that why we say agency will attempt to?
No,
F?
that's the out clause.
That's the out clause, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I
the
think
out
we
clause.
just, maybe.
But I can certainly wordsmith that. That's
All right.
that's
Yeah, let's
that's
just
not an issue.
tighten it. I'd like it for it to be as clear as we possibly can
Yes.
make it and not have any confusion. Even if there is a caveat where we can override, which it always makes me a little concerned on an override of a community's want and
Yeah.
desire. Because I think we're setting a project up to fail. If we can't convince them why it's a good project, then and the project leader, the applicant can't convince a community why it's a good project, then should we really be overriding someone?
Is it for the purpose of kind of that, like, what is that term where they have like the loud minority, like you have one person who's being very vocal against the project and people who like it kind of just sit complacently to avoid one person kind of putting to bed something that the community
Well,
likes.
but that's why I think that it's the elected officials, which
Who are
represent
having
and that's who they should be going to, the elected officials, and let them sort out, locally let them voice their concerns with their town halls, which is what is intended. And if the community, if the town board, because that's who then makes the decision, not,
Yeah.
it's not the one lone person, but if if we can't convince the town why it's a good idea, or the project applicant can't convince the town, then maybe it's not a good idea for the community. So, overriding that, I mean, it just, you want people to do their jobs.
Yes. The only thing, and this could be where the chair has gotten in my ear, is the idea that you don't have maybe towns or school districts who understand everything about a pilot and an IDA, and if you have part wanting to go through, you have part who just don't, then what is I don't want to use the wrong language, but what is the point of a board who's represented, and put in place by elected officials, sitting at the table doing all of this work on a project, if you're then going to go to people who aren't elected to do that,
Yeah, but
giving
if you're
yourself
going
that
through
out.
but if you're going through a town board, those are elected officials. Those are people that the community has put into office. And if the town board approves it, then we
Then we're
have the
good.
answer. If the town board doesn't, and the applicant hasn't convinced the town, even if we think it's a good idea, we may not know what
What's
is
the
in the
ins and outs?
community. And to me, the community should, now, if it's political, I mean, there's
That's
all
where I
those.
think it's the idea is that you want it, but if there was this one little thing and then,
Yeah.
you know,
I
I don't
think-
know,
think-
do you want to
yeah.
give yourselves
an
the
out.
out, I guess.
Yeah.
Like when you take it out, you lose the out. And that would be, I think, where, I don't know.
Here, the only concern I have with that, is, if we're trying to be transparent, if we're trying to work more closely with our communities and show the advantage of what we're doing, we can't, I think we have to be cautious on how we lay this out.
I
think-
100% agree.
I hear what Mike is saying, but I also know that, part of the bad rep is when you're dismissive, and you can't dismiss people's concerns.
No.
You try to help them better understand where this could be of value, and I don't always think we do a good enough job. I think we are more dismissive, and hence why we get a rap where people
No,
don't
I
believe
agree.
we're looking out for the best interest of the community. So.
I
I don't know if there's a way, Joe, to have some kind of language in there that does give it without it being dismissive.
yeah.
So I
like
guess that would be the way to put it.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Joe?
Well, it's one of those things he's gonna have to
Think about it.
ponder on.
Yes,
All right, so then we at least got through the
Okay.
policy.
Tab one.
Yay!
Tab
Joe,
one.
should we quickly summarize, or how do you want to do it, but tab 2 and so on and so forth?
Sure. I'm just taking notes here.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, so tab 2 was my effort to model at least one potential, and I'm sorry, I didn't really, maybe I wasn't listening very carefully to the roll. People in the room are Kastu, Lynn,
Oh.
Hillary.
and Hillary,
Yep.
and Lisa.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So as you know, in our UTEP policy, we have a matrix
Mm-hmm.
which has a points system which affects the extent of which the financial assistance is calculated. I thought I would offer that as a way to consider this concept also, and I, again, throwing darts at the wall, I came up with what I thought were reasonable elements that you would consider as part of a matrix. You'll see that I put brackets around the numbers, one, getting 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. Some of these columns mirror the matrix in our current policy, so there's some consistency. And then I added, military veterans set aside, low income set aside, revitalization and location as additional elements to consider in connection with granting IDA abatements. Now, calculation of or finalization of this is going to take some work, because not only does it require identification of elements that you want to incentivize, but it also requires time spent to put numbers with respect to those elements, and then preparing tables with the different abatement schedules for those numbers. So this concept is sophisticated and and requires a fair amount of work to bring to fruition. So that's tab 2. Tab 3 is the next step with respect to the matrix. You'll see that under Roman numeral 1, following tab 3, I talk about different categories for market, workforce, or senior. And you'll note that I left out low income in that list. And I'll get to that in just a second. You'll see that if you have, in category 1 is the fewest amount of points, and that percentage of exemption is essentially 485B. Category 2 is more advanced, and category 3 is further advanced. But again, what we would need to do is not only complete the matrix and complete the points, but also do a determination of what range of points we would need to have to fit into these various categories. So there is some significant additional work together with working on the definitions in Roman numeral 3 to coincide to these various categories of work, of housing. Now you'll see that in Roman numeral 2, I treated low-income housing differently. A number of our IDA clients have a tax exemption policy for low-income housing, and they treat it based on the amount of revenue being generated through rents at the project. You'll hear it in the trade described as a shelter rent component or a shelter rent concept, and that's what this is. And basically I rolled that out just to, because it's relatively simple, and it's something that I've seen in a number of other jurisdictions. So tab 2 and tab 3 are connected. Tab 4 was a real dart at the wall where I said, let's incentivize projects by way of more advanced real property tax abatements, but let's use not a points concept, but hey, what are you willing to do by way of low income set aside? So if you have, again, throwing a dart at the wall, if you have 5% of your units low income set aside, you get the first category. If you have 10%, you have the second category. If you have 15%, and again, dart at the wall. There's this concern, and you've seen it in the, if you read the press, you've seen it in the city of Albany. Again, using them as an example, the Common Council took it upon themselves to increase the amount of low-income set-aside for the approval of projects in the city of Albany. They did that approximately 6 months ago, maybe 12 months ago, against the advice of the mayor, who vetoed the provision and then was overridden, and the head of economic development of the city of Albany. Since those set-asides have been increased from where they were, there was a low-income set-aside already built into the statute, but they increased it, and I can't tell you the percentages because I just don't remember. The market rate housing pipeline in the city of Albany has dried up. So following this procedure, or following this decision or strategy with respect to incentivizing housing would require some work with respect to, okay, how much low income set aside can a developer afford and still have the project pencil and still have the developer willing to do the project. So this would require someone who knows something about low-income housing and the numbers and the costs of doing a project in Ulster County and determining what the project can bear. And just to give you an idea, what the thinking is, at least on the part of some people in the city of Albany government, when at least one common council member was challenged about, well, these percentages are too high, and accordingly the developer is not going to do the project, they dismissed that comment by saying, well, the IDA will just give them a better pilot, and that will fund this low-income housing set-aside.
Can I just, I think these are all really great components. I do think that, while I appreciate you taking a stab at the categories, I do question some of the categories, and maybe that goes back to what should we as an IDA be incentivizing, and we haven't really ever had a discussion around those elements. But as you go into, the next piece is, what does the incentive look like? I really believe that I don't necessarily, I have opinions, but I don't feel equipped to really do this in a way that is A, meaningful, B, addresses concern, because we could put a policy in place and incentives in place that at the end of the day doesn't bring anybody here to do any of these, because it's ridiculous. We haven't thought through it, and we're not developers that are looking at their pro forma, and doing the analysis to determine, is this a project or not a project. And so I don't know, I feel like we need somebody who understands all the elements of this to come to the table and advise us around the things we should be considering or not, the potential risks of one versus the other. I feel that this, and I've said from the get-go, this is not an easy policy to just throw out there when we're talking about tax abatements, and the implication of those tax abatements on a P&L for a project. And I feel like, I mean, you may feel more comfortable with it than I do, but I don't feel that I have the knowledge to do it in a meaningful way that would say, wow, this is something that's going to help our community move forward.
So I don't, and my question was going to be to you, Joe, who would that be that we should be talking to? Is it Dennis Doyle, or is it somebody in housing? Who would have that information that we should be talking to? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it would be Dennis Doyle, because that's more planning, but
No,
there will have to be some
my
input from him as
suggestion
well.
Is get a consultant.
Yeah, my suggestion would be to get a consultant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That to me, as you were saying this, and even just hearing of all the elements,
Yeah.
that because then that consultant is also, talking to the Dennis Doyles, talking to the legislative bodies, talking to a county executive, getting there. I mean, I know that this is not going to make Mike happy, but I got to tell you, I'd rather us, if we've got a project that is currently attached to something, let's look at it as a one-off. But I feel like, oh my God, I keep going back. It's not that I don't want to do something. I want to do something. I want to do something meaningful. But it is, we're not housing experts. We're not housing experts.
I mean, you can vote, I think, and this is what Mike, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but my assumption is vote to lift the moratorium, let projects come through on their own merit, and then work through all of these questions so you have a housing policy that you really like.
Here's my concern with that, and I've said this to Mike, and I'm going to say it out loud again and be really clear, that with that, lifting what we already have is not sufficient to give anybody a level of confidence. Right now, maybe the only housing project we should be doing is anything attached to a major manufacturing project. And if it's not attached to that, we shouldn't be doing it, because we don't have enough information with which to do it. I mean, that could be, come down to that kind of question. But, again, it's not a simple task. It's
No,
not a
it's not.
simple
And I
issue.
think
It's
you run a risk when you're incentivizing
the wrong things.
housing that doesn't tie directly to the mission. That would be my concern.
Yeah, because
I
then,
act-
well,
I
how do you
actually
defend
have-
it?
Yeah, when you
As
say-
counsel, you ask counsel on that.
How
do you
did you
defend
not,
it?
and then how do you get a developer to come in and say,
I
you know,
wanna work
how
there.
come
Yeah,
someone who's doing low-income housing is getting a better pilot when I'm doing workforce housing that directly ties to what this business is asking for, you know, to house the workforce that they hire. So yeah,
right.
so that would be, you know, a question I think we would need to really be able to stand behind, and that's where,
Well, and even just what we're
Yeah.
incentivizing, because I look at, let's think about this. Ulster County has taken a lead on a multitude of levels with regards to the environment.
yeah.
We have the weakest column here, which is the environment, and this is not, but it obviously needs to be filled in, but there's
Yeah.
a lot of work that needs to go into this, that what is realistic and what aligns with some of the current goals that have been put in place and that are achievable without blowing out a project.
Yeah.
So I just feel that's one element of many here that I think it creates a complex issue that I don't know we have a quick answer for.
And I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I think also what developers are gonna wanna see from us is something where they're not gonna have to do a deviated pilot. They're gonna wanna come in,
Consistency for
and they're gonna
everybody.
wanna know what the incentive is.
For how long they can
That's
have
right.
it,
Yep.
because they're gonna run their spreadsheets based on
Exactly.
those dates.
They don't wanna have to come before, and they wanna either know, is this gonna work for me or is it not? And I
Yeah.
think having a housing policy that's not dependent on a deviated pilot is what developers are gonna wanna see, in order to wanna come here.
And doing one-off may not be consistent with the future projects. If we really, really think it's a straight ball out of the park, then it may be, but I don't know if we have enough information just yet. So, Joe?
Yeah, Joe.
Well, one thought would be that you hire a consultant to do a countywide review, and in the meantime, you lift the moratorium and say we are willing to consider housing projects, but as part of any housing project, we need you to fund a consultant's report that shows what your pilot ask is consistent with a reasonable return for you and not profiteering, so that we're comfortable with the ask. And then under your UTEP, you either treat it as a deviation and get the local approvals at all the levels, or you say, look, during this interim period, we're going to exercise our power to not require local approvals on any kind of deviation, and move forward based on the strength of the consultant's report that shows that the pilot ask is reasonable.
So, I think that maybe can get us there. It makes me still uncomfortable, but that's where I think I think before you even do that, you hire the consultant, because it's not just helping us develop, but also being part of the review process of any project coming in. And maybe, again, we limit that project to those attached to manufacturing facilities, right?
Or maybe
Maybe
one that I think if you come in and you say we're gonna lift the moratorium, blah 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 blah, looking at each project and making sure it clearly aligns with the very specific types of workforce that the IDA incentivizes. Is that
Sorry,
your
that's my
parking?
Yeah, I have 5 minutes.
Okay. So, but we could also align it maybe too with if they're coming in, getting their own evaluation, maybe they're showing that, oh, we're putting this in the middle of the city of Kingston, this is the rents, these are the local manufacturers in the area, they're all understaffed workforce-wise, it doesn't maybe have to be one specific manufacturer, but maybe there are 8 manufacturers within a 2-mile radius. So we could maybe ask for those things from the consultant to show that this is tying to our mission.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking, and you guys tell me. I think that we lay out this proposal, saying we're still working on it,
Mhm.
because I think we gotta get this before the board on Wednesday.
Yes.
And I think,
And,
yes.
and so I would show them this one with all the tabs, have Joe kind of walk through the complexity of the things that we're proposing here.
Mhm.
And then if Joe, if this is doable, or I don't know, between all of you and Hillary, if we come up with a simplified proposal that goes into, how to lift it, but still have some, flexibility, but also not kind of run amok,
How to
right?
lift it without opening the floodgates.
Exactly.
And causing confusion within the community.
And recognizing, and again, this becomes a communication issue about, recognizing the complexity of the issue and, you know, having gone through all of this, realizing that, you know, we need the, you know, help of someone who is has expertise in this area, because we want to do justice to the
Yeah.
community, to the, you know, whatever.
But we don't want, we don't want to stop the county's agenda of bringing in housing, which is desperately needed,
Right.
by having a moratorium that goes on kind of indefinitely, because we're waiting now on a.
Well, and,
So that's a
but
good
again,
point.
this is housing, remember, this is workforce housing
Right.
for attracting businesses here. So that's why I think it's not addressing our per se housing issues in some of our communities,
No.
but it is attached to the driver of economic development
And making
So-
it clear.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Joe, to your last comment, I was going to say something simply that if it's not tied close to the mission, at this point in my mind, it's my opinion only, I would not be too keen on taking it as a one-off or a deviated project.
I
And
think that's
if
smart.
it's simply and this is an example, if it's simply an apartment complex, commercial, that would not tie directly to our mission. Would you agree with that at this point?
Sorry, is that to Joe Scott?
That's the
Yeah,
Joe
Joe Scott,
Scott.
yes, sorry, Joe, yes. Basically
That is to
saying
Joe
that if it's
Scott.
not related to a project, the housing is not related to the project, it's an independent apartment complex, let's say, which is a commercial thing, but that would be simply housing, that is not close to our mission. So if we do something like that, do we set a precedent saying, and do something wrong actually?
If you got an application for an 80 unit facility in downtown Kingston, I don't see how the IDA couldn't approve that from whether it was market, workforce, low income.
Maybe, because of the housing distress experienced
Well,
today in Kingston.
While not being
because
tied to a project, you're saying?
Because there's such a need for housing, and housing has such an impact on all the other economics in Ulster County.
Well, and I get that, to the point of, you know, some of our hospitality,
Yeah.
restaurants, et cetera, can't hire people because,
No one can live here.
Yeah.
Would it be fair, though, to ask these projects
I'm
to
gonna run
show
down just 'cause I
that?
need
Yes,
to.
please.
Absolutely, we would get a consultant's
yeah.
report showing that.
So we're
Yeah.
making sure that if we lift the moratorium and we wait for more information.
Joe, I'd like to interrupt.
Oh, yes,
Can
sorry.
we take a 5-minute break, and
Lynn has to feed the
Lynn
meter.
has to feed the meter, so she doesn't miss any discussion?
Sure, if you could make it 7 minutes, because I need to go. I need a biology break, and I also have a
Please
partner
do.
who's waiting for me.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
So, do we have like a break?
Do we pause or do we just keep running?
Well, we don't have an adjournment, so
Okay.
So we'll keep running, it's okay.
So we can run. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
We'll just not talk.
run for a moment.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. I'm gonna turn my mic off in case, you know.
I'll step out too.
Yeah.
So Joe, I think, unless there is anything else that we need to add, I think we have what
Two
we should be doing.
alternatives.
Yes, there we go.
And the first one,
Right.
which we just went through, is
Right.
much more complex.
And
Yeah.
we can present all of this to the board through you, Joe, on Wednesday.
Right, well-
to go
well,
over, sorry, go ahead.
No, if I can interrupt, there's
Yes.
actually, there were three alternatives. One is the matrix, which is complicated. The second is the low income set aside. And the third was a simple one where I said market rate housing gets the least amount of benefit. What did I say for the second one? Senior housing gets the next level, and workforce housing gets the most benefit.
Mhm.
And then low income housing still gets the 10%. So the last
Tab.
it's tab 5 is fall out of bed easy. The only complication there is coming up with reasonable definitions as to what constitutes
Okay.
workforce housing,
Yeah.
senior housing, and low income housing.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, is easy. It's because you've got fixed abatement schedules. So it's really, it's not complicated, but, so sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make sure you got the full picture. The last tab is something that we can talk about at your convenience. It adds a whole nother level of complexity that you may or may not be interested in, but I wanted to make sure that you at least saw it. And it was something that Kostub and I talked about when he
Okay.
and I were doing kind of like a summary earlier on this. So yeah, sorry to interrupt. Back to you. Back to
That,
you.
no, just so, the last tab, I'm
6.
just,
Tab 6. Yep.
yeah, and this, could you just briefly just
Sure.
highlight what that
What-
last
what-
tab is, just so I
what
don't have
that-
to read the whole thing?
Yep, that's okay.
I will later, but just give me
Yep.
the,
Right. What tab 6 is, it demonstrates for one of our IDA clients that has an extensive housing policy, extensive housing set of projects, is that they were concerned that, look, suppose we are incredibly successful and our municipality takes off and tax rates actually drop because there's investment from other private sectors and everything goes the way we want it to go. Well, they didn't want the project applicant on a long-term, a 30-year pilot to continue to benefit from that abatement if the community takes off. And so what they said is that beginning in year 13, we're going to do a calculation of what your pilot payment is under the pilot structure, and then what your payment would be if we took 11.5% times your gross revenue.
Okay.
and
and if-
why
and- and if-
11.5%? Is that the remainder? Is that just?
No, it was a number that they determined based on the discussions with their consultant as to a reasonable amount that they would have to pay in real property taxes.
So essentially, why have an abatement in place or structure in place if it's not incrementally incentivizing the community any longer?
So it's like they no
Right.
longer have a but-for need
There's no
because
need,
they're,
Exactly,
they
that's
just
right.
pay their own
Because-
tax bill.
Right,
Because tax
that's right.
bills have regulated.
Okay.
Okay.
That's right.
Makes sense.
That's right.
Got it, yeah,
And this
if
Right.
that's the case.
And
got it.
taxes have lowered,
that's the case.
correct?
If that's the case,
Yeah. Okay.
right. Which
So
is,
with that-
which is an even bigger incentive to, to support a community
Yeah.
and longer term, which I sometimes think, yeah.
Yeah, no,
I
that
like
makes
it.
sense. I do
I
too.
like it.
That was smart.
But again, I think each of these tabs represents a layer of complexity that I think even as a board, we should have a little workshop that talks about what are the things that we, because we can put things together as a governance committee, but I think it would be beneficial to have even
I was gonna say the word session, but workshop is better.
a workshop
Yes.
that just talks about
Informs
the
everybody.
baseline fundamentals of what do we stand for on housing, and what does it mean? And that we have a robust debate and then build a policy and a structure around the outcome of that workshop.
Pre and post
Yeah.
conversations.
Joe, does that make sense to you?
It does, with the exception that I would really recommend that, given, I think all these questions and these comments are very, are very good. I think my concern for you all is that you show, quote, progress in the, on the subject. And this IDA has done a tremendous amount of work internally in terms of discussing the issue. And you've also, you had a work session where you invited all these people from, government, private sector, etc., to talk to you about housing. And that took place maybe 2 years ago, maybe 2.5. And I was sorely, I'm sorry to be candid on this point, I was sorely disappointed by the level of comments that we got. Here we were reaching out, asking for help. The only person that really provided any value and any guidance was Marge Gallagher. Mm-hmm. And she said, God damn it, go out and do something. We need help in housing. Give them pilots, give them sales tax exemption. We need projects to happen. Steve has talked about a housing czar at the county level. Is there a housing czar? I'm really being,
so.
No.
I'm being incredibly blunt.
Oh.
So what you need to do is you need some guidance, and the only guidance that you're going to get, frankly, is from a paid consultant, because you pull someone in from ABC, the town or the county or the whatever. I don't think you're going to get much. You're not going to get much to put your hat on.
Yeah,
you're right, and I think that should be the recommendation, Joe. Not to interrupt, that should be the recommendation.
Yeah, exactly. You and I say, okay, that's good. I'm good with that.
And last thing I was going to request on that point, if you have any suggestions on consultants that have been used, we cannot finalize, but it'll be good to know who those could be and if there are any.
I'm going to dig up some names. I'm going to dig up the name of the firm that did the work for the city of Albany here, and I believe they're out of Cincinnati, and they're Cracker Jack. They're really good.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay. Great.
All right. So I think we have a plan of action on what to do.
Short
and how to
term
present
and
short term.
a longer term.
That's right.
But again, it's highlighting these elements, which really lays out the complexity of the
Yes.
issue.
And
we're not going to fix it tomorrow, but we still have an opportunity to do some things.
Yes,
Yeah.
we could. I think we all would love to, but yes,
Yeah.
we cannot. And it's going to continue. But
Well,
that was what I wanted to.
You have a potential option for doing something on the interim
Yeah.
too.
Yes.
And again,
Yes.
I'm sensitive to like I said, showing progress, and frankly,
Yes.
You're ramping up staff-wise, and I know Michael's looking at the numbers. I know Hillary's looking at the numbers. You want to make sure that your burn-off rate is that you've got time to wait for the consultant to come back with a report for you.
Yeah, in the interim, we need to bring projects in and
Yes.
fill the coffers. I
Yes.
get it.
That's
But
It's
can
very
you
blunt way to put it, yes.
outline
sensitive.
something for Wednesday? I don't know, between you and Hillary and Lisa, can we get this modified option out about lifting and what it would look like?
The moratorium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't think what is in place is enough. I think
Correct.
we need a little tweaking of
But
that.
the only concern, Joe, that I would have to Lynn's point would be if we lift the moratorium and change actual language, then we need to publicly put that out and get the 30 days and all that. The
Yeah, but
notification.
it's just the approval of the board to seek, maybe it's not finalizing the plan, but seeking input to finalize in December.
So
You're talking about notification to towns and
I am
villages.
talking about if we, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we say to the board, we feel there's a lot of more work that needs to be done, blah, 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 we need a consultant.
Here's an interim
So
action.
interim, we want to lift the moratorium with the caveat that we are only going to incentivize projects that can show their direct tie to our mission. And you want language specific to how we're gonna do that? Is that,
I think I think that we still have to make some of the edits on the policy side. as
I
well.
don't think so. I don't think so.
No?
I don't know.
not if we're gonna
Because
tie it to the mission, cause the policy is pretty,
If we keep,
The pol-
go ahead, Joe, sorry.
I think if you lift the moratorium and a market rate housing project comes in
yep,
the next day, you can do that project if you get the consent of the county, the school,
yeah.
and,
You don't
and the
do
city,
override.
or if you decide not to get their consent.
Right.
But we could just be very, very conservative on projects that really start to kind of, in that mission creep scope.
And then with respect to the pilot structure, you say, well, you got to give us a consultant, or you got to pay for a consultant, so that we look, what do you want from a pilot? And they'll say whatever they're going to say. And then,
I'm having heart palpitations on this, because I really feel like which is what Mike wanted to do, and I'm really not comfortable with, is opening the floodgates. And to me, without any adjustments to what we already have communicated in the whole policy discussion, getting incorporated into lifting the moratorium with these additions to the policy, even if it means waiting another month to get it out to everybody to say, here's what we're doing, I don't know if that's required. I just feel that just lifting the moratorium is, it puts a lot of onus, and it's gonna create, no guardrails. Because I didn't think that policy had guardrails in the first place, and we need guardrails. And some of the things we talked about today are part of the, just making some clarifications, in the language.
The only thing I'm thinking that I just worry, for you guys as a board, this is my own personal opinion, is if we start to kind of lift the moratorium with modifications, and then we go out and get a consultant, are we just really pushing out a housing policy? Because, you're looking at just so much more time before that's created, and then if you lose steam on that, because you kind of have a moratorium with caveats that everyone's comfortable enough with, do you then lose steam on ever really sitting down and tackling the housing policy? That would be my own, this is just me, that would be my concern.
I totally get that, but here's my concern. You put it out the way it exists now, and to me, it is wide open.
I would agree, but I would have to say, I've only been here 2 months, and I'm not seeing housing policy or housing projects beating down our doors. We don't have a long list, so for.
Well, but I'm hearing we do. That's not what.
One.
No. Okay, so that's a new piece of information.
I've seen one come through a pre-approval state, in the stop me if I'm wrong, Joe. I only know of one housing that really has any real traction, and it to me is one that would clearly fit in this moratorium lifted or new housing policy.
Okay.
It's very much tied to.
yeah, I think if we're talking about the same one, it's at
Yeah.
Barrel Lofts,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah.
It's just it's
I think
already a
people are going to be pretty
manufacturing
comfortable with that
plant.
So
project.
Joe, just to clarify,
Mixed
I
use.
remember from the last conversation, there were potential 4 projects. Out of the 4, only one is housing related, which is close to the mission. Is that the idea then?
Well, look, it is Monday. I mean, we could put this off till December, right?
Yeah, but I'm
Well, I
not
think
looking.
they want an update and some movement at
I-
least.
I-
for
Well,
I
we
think-
could
I
certainly
think
do it.
I think some language. I mean, when we say it meets our mission, are we talking about the policy as it exists today, the purpose? I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, because I want to go back and take a look at everything again.
The mission is the UCIDA mission, Joe, right? And the purpose we are talking about, which is on
Is
page
the
number
housing.
2,
Yeah.
housing policy. Joe?
Yeah, the mission, the mission is certainly the IDA mission, yes, what's printed on the bottom of the agenda,
Yeah.
right? And I guess I'm trying to understand what the problem is with respect to the lifting the moratorium. Under your existing policy, if you lift the moratorium, you could do the barrel loft
Yep.
either one of two ways. You could say, barrel loft, go get the school, the county, and the city's approval, and come back to us. And when you do that, also get approval on a pilot. Or under our existing housing policy, without the, as lifted, we could do the barrel loft project without local approvals, and we could also do a deviation of a pilot agreement without local approvals, because our UTEP allows us to not have to go, if we so determine, to go to the local jurisdictions. And our argument for not going to the local jurisdictions for barrel loft would be, we got a consultant's report saying that they need the pilot agreement at this level in order to do the project with this level of return, rate of return, and the rate of return is within the range of what a normal non-profiteering developer would need in order to do a project. Again, I'm not pushing. What I'm trying to do is give you options.
Yeah.
We could certainly, put everything on hold. And who knows? I don't know how quickly Barrel Loft wants to move.
And we still would have to vote on it as well.
Yeah.
You have to vote on the moratorium, and you have to vote on Barrel Loft. Absolutely. If you decide to accept the application.
So is there anything, I think, in the arbitrary and capricious clause that if we lifted the moratorium and we were very conservative to our outs, and when we use them, if we just take a conservative approach on that, could someone sue us for being arbitrary and
Right, how does
capricious on that?
leave us open?
Well, what I would do is I would have, an extensive resolution making all these findings as to why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, if we lifted the moratorium and didn't adopt a policy for 10 years and treated 50 projects, each one differently, some really nice, some very aggressive, some not so aggressive, and there was no basis for any of those decisions,
We'd have problems.
then we'd get sued. But if this is a short term, while we're waiting, I mean, we're putting on, well, we're not putting on hold, we're eliminating the hold during a consultancy period to accommodate the timing of projects that may be coming to fruition at this point.
Right, and in parallel, considering other things for how projected new housing policy, if you may, is that what the resolution would be like?
Yeah, we would say that we're eliminating the moratorium, but with the idea that we're hiring a consultant and we're going to have more guidance delivered to us on finalizing our policies. But in the meantime, we're going to rely on our existing policies with respect to housing.
To keep moving on.
To keep moving on, correct.
I'll think about it too.
Now, what do you, I mean, again, we've thrown a lot at each other here. What do you need for Wednesday? Do you need just an explanation of tabs 1 through 6? Or do you need an explanation of tabs 1 through 6 plus a resolution eliminating the moratorium? It might be easier, and from an optics standpoint, how's that? I mean, I think you all are sensitive to the optics of this.
Yep.
Why don't we have an update on Wednesday, and then consider lifting the moratorium at the December meeting?
Yeah, because I would like to see
I
language.
would, yeah, I was gonna say.
To me, that's my biggest concern. I'm okay with kind of laying out what we've kind of come to based on some really good conversation on this. And really the complexities and ensuring we're doing something that's gonna add value. But lifting the moratorium at the same time without having any language to look at, and what are we lifting and what are we saying, it gives me
We
a
also
little
may not get a
pause.
consensus on the vote, which
Yeah.
I don't think would be.
Good.
Yeah, no, I think in that way, right, and I'm actually very concerned about the optics.
Yes.
I think we do an update on Wednesday,
Okay.
and I think we should consider, the tough question there is whether we do an executive session or an open session.
I'd say
because-
open. I think it's always
We're
better.
leaning to transparency on this process.
It's
I
important.
think let's keep it in the.
And-
Particularly because of the complexity of
Right.
the issues and the fact that we're trying to balance multiple needs in a way, and never having done this before. This is
Yeah.
not something we can go to 20 other agencies and say, how did you guys do this? People are still figuring it out.
And people have to be
But
able
my-
to say that, hey, they told us everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, and my advice then would be, I wouldn't distribute this memo, because what
That
my
was my next
concern
question.
is,
Okay,
my concern is if that memo is distributed, it's going to be on the front page of the Freeman,
Yeah, okay,
and then you're going to be locked into whatever the Freeman thinks.
Right.
true.
Our housing policy should be, and we're going to be comparing. If you decide to do something completely different 6 months from now, even with the basis of the support of a blue chip consulting firm,
Mhm.
you're going to get quote attacked by saying, well, wait a minute, you said you were going to do this over here.
listen, we've already discussed all of this because this governance meeting is a public record.
Right, but the document hasn't been distributed.
Right.
No,
I
I,
mean,
like
we've
your
talked-
suggestion.
It's still a
Joe.
working
Yeah, it's a
document.
working document. It's
Yeah,
a draft.
And what it does- what it-
it's attorney-client privilege.
Right.
And
It's
it
attorney-client-
highlighted the complexity of the issues that I think we all realize at this juncture we need help in navigating.
Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
then, so on just kind of getting
Yes.
down the nuts. So on Wednesday, is that update coming from you, Civic Governance, coming from Joe?
I
Because we're
would
not
say
going to
I can.
distribute this, so.
No, we're
Yeah.
not going to distribute this. It should be coming from Joe. I can set it
Tee
up.
it up.
Yes, I can
Okay.
tee it up. with
Yeah,
Joe.
you tee it up, Chair.
is-
Yes, you
Okay.
should
It
chair
is
it.
a
You should-
council. who
And
should
we can
deliver.
all comment on
Yes,
it
we have
throughout
discussed it.
after Joe gives the update,
Yeah.
and that, the course of action we recommend at this juncture is to review the current policy, consider lifting the moratorium
Yep.
with maybe potentially a minor adjustment here or there to get things moving.
Correct.
All right, and then, Joe, just from a legal, do we give notice to all the taxing jurisdictions that we're, going to be voting on lifting the
Lifting.
moratorium?
We'll talk about that for the
Yeah.
December meeting.
Okay,
Yep.
All right, I've got
All right.
all right, thank you. We're gonna.
Thank you, Joe. And if I need anything, I'll call you. I don't think so, but we would like to adjourn the meeting. Can I have a motion to?
Yeah,
Please go
Joe,
ahead.
I really thank you, because this is, this kind of put into actual, black and white, my concerns that I maybe have not been very good at articulating over the last several months. But, thank you for putting the effort here, because I think this was a valuable document.
Yes.
Well, thank you, and you should thank Hillary and Costu and Mike for directing me in a friendly
To
way.
get it done. Well,
See,
thank
that's-
everybody.
See, that's the difference where Lynn is saying thanks to you because we simply directed you.
We did all the
So,
work.
But that aside, I would like to call the meeting to adjourn. If I could have a motion,
I'll make
And-
the motion.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right, it's November 13, 2023, 2:16 p.m. I'd like to call to order the meeting for Ulster County Capital Resource Corporation. The roll call, Costa Bahal present, Lynn Archer.
Here.
Here, Diane Anyon, absent with notice. We can approve the meetings if I have a motion.
I approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Same here. Public comment, we don't have any. We don't need an executive session. For old business, let's reflect what we discussed in the UCIDA meeting. Any new business? None?
None.
May I call?
I make
for
a motion
adjourn?
to adjourn.
Agreed. Second,
All in favor?
all in favor? Aye.
Aye. Thank you.